My name is Professor Chris Alden. I am Director of LSE Ideas. I'm working together with colleagues in the Global South Unit. This is one of our first online presentations to bring ideas, insights, and experiences to audiences and policy communities in the Global South about the issues that matter involving the Global South. So one of these issues is, of course, the changing dynamics and role of China as an actor, and indeed the agency of actors in response to or working with China. And today we have someone who's an expert on this in this area, Nathaniel Ocquaye, who is a graduate of the LSE, an MSc in international relations, also a BSc in China as well. He's worked for the Ditchley Foundation, and for some time worked for a Chinese construction firm in Africa. So all of these skill sets he's brought together and indeed published on are part of why we are anxious to hear what he has to say about this topic and the like. The topic, of course, is the persistence of illegal Chinese mining, with the case studies that look at West Africa, perhaps Ghana in particular. I'm also very pleased to have as a discussant today Dr. Folashadé Soulé. Dr. Soulé is at Oxford University, the Blavatsky School of Governance. Before that, she was here at LSE Ideas as a fellow, and of course she graduated from Sciences Po, looking at the role of emerging powers, in particular BRICS countries, and has published widely on China-Africa issues, and most recently looking at the role of agency and in particular the Francophone speaking regions of West Africa. So I think we're in good hands today to get a really lively session. What I've asked our speaker to do is to speak 15 to 20 minutes. I believe he has some slides as well, and then our discussant will follow up with some commentary from there. Once we've done that, of course, we'll open it up to the audience, and we can have what I'm sure will be a good, rousing debate. Nathaniel, it is in your hands.
Well, thank you, Professor Chris Alden, for this opportunity, and thank you to LSE Ideas Global South Unit for this platform. I think I'll begin by saying something briefly that this discussion is actually, my presentation is actually a brief highlight of the working paper that was produced. And I'm much more interested in a discussion of the questions or like the critiques that our audience may have about the working paper. And also just a little disclaimer that I do not have all the answers, but I will attempt to offer some nuance on the issue of illegal Chinese mining in Ghana. And I may not answer some questions for obvious reasons. And one of those reasons is there are many things that we do not know about illegal Chinese mining due to limited information or data on the activities of illegal miners, which is perceived as like illegal and criminalized in most countries, especially Ghana. And with that, I will share my screen and begin this very short and brief presentation. As you can see, the first page of my screen is quite different from the typical kind of thing you would see about illegal Chinese mining. And the reason why I use this picture is to portray or like send out the nuance that is involved with this illegal activity of some Chinese residents in African countries. I will begin by giving out a brief introduction of artisanal and small-scale mining in Ghana and local Chinese involvement in the sector, and then also bring up a new kind of theoretical conceptualization of the problem with which Chris Alden and I previously published a paper on African agency at the micro level, where I will discuss the role of local patrons in facilitating illegal Chinese mining in Ghana. And then I'll look at the implications of illegal Chinese mining in Ghana and then offer some conclusions. So artisanal and small-scale mining in Ghana has a long history. In fact, there are at least up to the early 6th century, artisanal mining has been an indigenous craft of Ghanaians, even before the arrival of the Europeans. And during this period, up until the 1980s, into the early 1990s, artisanal and small-scale mining did not pose like significant threat to the environment in Ghana. So it was a discussed issue, but not as heated and debated as after the Chinese gold rush that began in the late 2008. So formalization of the sector began in 1989 under the Provisional National Defense Council, where 3 laws were passed to help regulate the sector. And this was due to the fact that the sector had been marginalized owing to the focus on large-scale mining, which was thought by the leaders, the then leaders, as having the potential to bring much more investment. So the small-scale gold mining law, the PNDC law 218, is actually a law that permits Ghanaians to apply for a license to mine for gold on a plot of land not more than 25 acres and without the use of explosive for 3 to 5 years. These details will actually help us to understand why illegal Chinese mining became like a real issue in Ghana in recent years. So the laws were later updated in 2006 in the Minerals and Mining Act. And Section 83 of this law established small-scale mining as an exclusive occupation for Ghanaian citizens. However, Chinese citizens began taking part in ASM from the early 2000s, but there was increased participation from 2008 onwards after the spike in gold prices, which caused an exodus of Chinese miners from the Guangxi province in China to Ghana to engage in the small-scale mining. Okay, so there are several explanations for how the Chinese came to be in Ghana, but one of them, which is very credible, has been a reason has been provided by Professor Gavin Hilson of the University of Surrey, and he says that in 2008, several licensed operators from Ghana were actually sent to China to train and learn to help them improve gold output or gold production in the small-scale mining sector. And then these licensed operators used the visits to identify potential Chinese investors. And that is where intensive or like active involvement of Chinese citizens became very evident in the small-scale mining sector in Ghana. So resulting companies were established like Hansel Mining. And unfortunately, it's rather unfortunate that they've been bringing in several thousands of Chinese miners to engage in small-scale mining. That should not be a problem, but according to the laws of Ghana, this is not an activity that is reserved for foreigners. It's reserved exclusively for Ghanaian citizens. So at this point, I would like to make it clear that there are other foreign nationals involved in small-scale mining, like Russians, like Indians, and other citizens from surrounding neighboring countries in West Africa, like Nigeria, Cote d'Ivoire, Togo, Ivory Coast. But the Chinese citizens are key on the radar due to the introduction of new technology and harmful chemicals and literally unorthodox mining practices that have had a very severe impact on the environment in Ghana, especially our river bodies. So this particular discussion, I'm really looking at the mining in river bodies, so alluvial mining, which, I mean, the Chinese introduced some heavy machinery and equipment, particularly the chamfer equipment, which is literally like a raft that is put on the river to mine for alluvial gold from the riverbed. And this has caused severe pollution of Ghana's water bodies. So we have increased turbidity and high levels of heavy metal pollution in our river bodies. And the government of Ghana from 2013 onwards took several measures to curb the issue of illegal Chinese mining in Ghana. And some of the measures included deportation, military raids, and provision of alternative livelihood projects in mining communities. But all of these projects have not helped. So earlier last year, Chris, Alden and I were having a discussion on why is this so? Why do we keep seeing the Chinese in Ghana every now and then, and there are news of their arrest and stuff like that? But before I go on to the explanation that we found as credible for the increased involvement of Chinese citizens in small-scale mining, I would like to say that the coming of the Chinese produced two main effects in the small-scale mining sector. If you look at the table on the right side of my presentation, you realize that gold output from the small-scale mining sector shot up from 11% in 2005 to 38% in 2016. So there has been significant improvement in the total gold produced in the small-scale mining sector. But at the same time, there has been significant destruction and pollution of Ghana's water bodies, to the extent that the Ghana Water Corporation has made it clear to Ghanaians that if we do not take drastic measures to curb the issue of direct mining in river bodies, Ghana would be importing water by 2030. And I recently attended a conference, an inaugural lecture that was held by the University of Ghana, where Professor Vincent Nate provided a detailed account of the environmental impact of ASM. And he reviewed what he called a silent killer, where he discussed the heavy metal pollution that has been caused by the unorthodox methods that has been introduced by illegal Chinese miners into small-scale mining. So we have heavy metal pollution in our rivers, and the fish end up eating substances from the river, gets contaminated with lead, mercury, cyanide, and humans in turn consume these fish products or the seafood, which in turn affects the health of our citizens. So it's quite a very worrying and heartbreaking issue. I would like to, at this point, talk about the legacy of the Chinese gold rush and make it clear that when you look at the percentage of people involved in small-scale mining, and you look at the Chinese involved, it's actually a very small percentage. So it's said, reports indicate that there are a little over 1 million people directly involved in small-scale mining. And a report by the South China Morning Post indicated that from 2000 to 2013, there are about 50,000 Chinese that migrated to Ghana in search of gold. Now, when you do the calculation, you realize that this is literally like 5% of the people involved, of Chinese people involved in illegal mining. But if you look at the diagram here, you realize that the chamfer that the Chinese citizens introduced into direct river mining is actually still popular in Ghana till this day, although a lot of Chinese have been deported, or most of them have abandoned their illegal mining activities due to military raids, persistent military raids. But you realize that they've left behind the technology that was introduced by the Chinese has been left behind, and this causes persistent destruction of Ghana's water bodies. So when you look at the map, you realize that the violet dots on the map is actually indicating the technology that was used by the Chinese or introduced by the Chinese. And this is rather forms a huge part of the mining techniques that is used by illegal miners currently in Ghana. So direct river mining has actually increased output of gold production, but at the heavy expense of the environment. And at this point, I would like to introduce what we call the local patrons. So in examining this issue and the persistence of illegal Chinese mining, based on my own experiences in the mining communities, as well as discussions with several colleagues and researchers, I realized that agency at the micro level in African societies could actually provide key insights into the successful absorption of foreign private entrepreneurs into the political economy of African countries. Other scholars like Gauss Mohan and Lampert have also conducted similar studies in Nigeria, where they found out that it's actually the local citizens within the vicinities of foreign enterprises that determine their success. So these African citizens are those that we describe as local patrons, and we define them as people akin to the elite or ordinary people who rally during elections for the elites, or they may be close to the traditional leadership or just the indigenous in the community. The role that local patrons have played in helping to perpetuate the issue of illegal mining is very powerful, actually, because besides the emphasis on government officials and the state being involved in the activity or facilitating the activity, when the Chinese get down into the forest, down into the mining communities, it's the very people that live there that assist them, and take them to the places where they can mine and introduce them to some local authorities that they bribe or like engage in some corrupt activities in order to get false documentation to engage in mining. So the power of local patrons is actually very, very significant when it comes to the issue of illegal Chinese mining, in that they're able to shape the policies, the institutions, and the fate of the political elites. So sometimes the solutions to eradicating illegal Chinese mining do not go far, because the very people for whom the leaders may be fighting for may end up kicking them out of office due to the complexity and the intertwining of the issue of illegal mining between local citizens and foreigners. So there was this statement that was made by the Chinese ambassador to Ghana in 2019, where he said, and I quote him, he's like, "How can we be able to do galamsey in your country? It is because of your own people. Why are Chinese not doing illegal mining in South Africa, where there is also a lot of gold? It is not possible because the local people don't support us. But in Ghana, some locals help the small number of Chinese people doing galamsey." So throughout my research and the literature review, I realized that most scholars were using the terms like local people, local authorities that help the Chinese to engage in illegal mining. And I would like to, at this point, provide a little discussion of the hierarchies amongst local patrons. What happens, or what I realized has been happening over the years, is whenever there is a military raid, or whenever there is a reactive policy solution to the issue of illegal Chinese mining, most of the times the people that are arrested or that are attacked are the poverty-driven class. And these are local patrons who are simply seeking an economic livelihood. And what happens is the business class and the management class are usually people who have powerful connections in society, both in Ghana and in China. So whenever there is a raid, usually it's the poverty-driven class that is attacked, leaving the business class and the management class. Because unfortunately, it's rather unfortunate that in the business class, these are powerful syndicates in Ghana and China, and most of them, if not a large percentage of them, are actually involved in governments. They may be politicians or like people in key positions in society in Ghana and in China. So it makes eradicating the issue of illegal Chinese mining very difficult. So in my working paper, I think I mentioned the fact that if we are able to get hold of the business class involved in illegal mining, then we may find out that it's possible to collapse the enterprise. So the implications of illegal Chinese mining is quite sad. If you look at the right hand of my presentation, this is actually the river basin of the Pra River, which is a major source of water supply in Ghana. And alluvial gold mining has actually led to the destruction of the water, increased turbidity of the water, and changed the color of the water, contaminated it totally, if not completely, and destroyed the ecosystem and biodiversity within the water bodies. And there has been spread of disease to humans and livestock due to the introduction of toxic chemicals like cyanide, which before the arrival of Chinese was not necessarily used in small-scale mining. Also, in my previous slides, you realize that small-scale mining should not involve the use of explosives. But the Chinese introduced the use of explosives, and this causes structural damages to buildings and infrastructure in mining communities. The economic impact is quite diverse because there are positive sides, like the springing up of subsidiary firms and grocery shops. But it's rather unfortunate that if you are in a mining community and you do not engage in the illegal mine, you may not stand to benefit from the economic impact that is introduced. And we have very negative social impacts like truancy due to the profitability, the alleged profitability of small-scale mining, teenage pregnancy, and gun violence in mining communities. In conclusion, I had a look at most of the solutions that have been offered by international organizations and the government's reports, and you realize that almost every possible idea or solution to illegal mining or small-scale mining that is not regulated has been offered, but yet still you find out that these solutions are literally not working. So I think we need a change in our leadership style. Most of these leaders hold conferences and debates about how to improve or regulate the small-scale mining. But usually when you look at the audience present, it's usually those in the business class and in the management class. But those citizens in the poverty-driven class are actually not involved, you know. So key stakeholders would try to alter like solutions or ideas that could actually help eradicate the issue of illegal mining because they have their interests at stake. So a change in our leadership style where our leaders or like leaders both from the central level of government and the decentralized level of government are able to engage with the grassroots in the mining communities to understand their aspirations and what they hope to get out of the resources that they have been blessed with in their mining communities is key to addressing this issue. And a little bit of patriotism and national pride on the part of Ghanaians and civil servants could actually help with eradicating this issue. I say this because I have a professor friend who told me of a story. He's like, he was flying from Kenya to Accra, and then he had 4 Chinese citizens on the plane with him. And they told him, although they're on a tourist visa, they are actually not going to Ghana for tourism. They're actually going there to engage in illegal mining. And he said when they got to the Kotoka International Airport at Accra, a Ghanaian citizen, actually a Ghanaian immigration officer, came for these Chinese. So they didn't even join the queue, you know, they were taken out and treated, giving special treatment. So you realize that there are so many solutions and emphasis on institutions on how to solve the issue, but the very people that run our institutions and like civil servants, some military personnel, some civil servants actually are facilitating or helping foreigners engage in illegal mining in Ghana. And after several considerations, I realized that there are several politicians and government officials involved in small-scale mining. So trying to eradicate the issue always faces challenges from the very top level of government. So I was having this discussion with Chris Alden yesterday that why don't we create rules and regulations that decriminalize the activity and provide a framework within which both the high and the low can engage in small-scale mining, but within the set regulations and within the set rules of the game. And usually you would realize that most of the solutions that have been offered by the Ghanaian government are rather reactive solutions rather than proactive solutions. And the issue of small-scale mining needs a comprehensive plan, including research, so we can integrate artisanal and small-scale mining into the socio-political economy of Ghana. And with this, I would end my presentation for now and really looking forward to questions which I would attempt to answer. Thank you.
Super. Thank you very much. Very comprehensive and insightful. Lots to talk about. First, I will turn it over to Folashadé, who will give commentary on the topic. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is a really interesting paper by Nathaniel Ocquaye on the role and agency of local patrons in explaining the persistence of illegal mining by some Chinese in Ghana. I think what is particularly interesting and enlightening, I would say, is how the author argues that the persistence of illegal mining is the result of a collaborative effort, between local patrons and Chinese miners that are categorized in this paper as comrades in need versus comrades with power. And Nathaniel shows how the local patrons are key to the successful absorption of Chinese miners, the illegal ones, at least into the political economy of illegal mining in Ghana. And also, well, he didn't mention it here, but it's in the paper. It's interesting how he shows the evolution, as small-scale mining or galamsey has evolved from an ancestral practice, almost non-harmful to the environment and livelihoods, to one that is more large-scale, with the introduction of techniques brought in by the Chinese that are much more harmful to the environment. And also this is due to a lack of national regulation in its enforcement. And two other parts that are found also of particular interest is the different ways by which the Chinese participate in the process, how it started, and the role played by the Ghanaian local patrons in the process, but also that this is the result of agency, power, and efficacy of these local patrons to facilitate the absorption of the Chinese into illegal gold mining in Ghana. So said that, I have some comments and also some questions here. First of all, maybe you mentioned it, Nathaniel, in the larger version of your paper, but the conceptual definition of local patrons, that I wondered, where some pre-existing maybe definitions stemming from sociology or political science, maybe, especially about the local part. First of all, what is local here? Are we talking about non-state actors? Are we talking about some sub-state actors? You mentioned the military, the village chiefs, and so on. So these are also, can these also be considered as local? Like, are we talking both about non-state and sub-state actors? Because in the literature on agencies, local agencies also exercised sometimes by civic actors, whether it's CSOs, citizens, and so on. And also local patrons, more specifically, this notion of local patronage or local brokers that has been conceptualized before. I'm thinking in the Francophone world by academics like de Sardon, Jean-Pierre Olivier de Sardon, in his work in 1993 on the uses and misuses of development aid in West Africa. He was talking about local brokers, actually, who use aid as an annuity. So I think you might want to take a look at this too. And also, maybe, what is your definition of agency in this case? Agency as a concept comes up a lot in the paper. What is your definition of agency or local agency? I think it would be helpful to qualify this, especially because what your paper shows also is that the exercise of agency that is very often used in a very celebratory way. You show here that in this context, how it's very inward looking, by these local patrons. It's selfishly motivated and oriented towards self-interests in the Ghanaian case, to the detriment of the environment, health, and livelihoods. And I think this is really important as it enlarges our understanding of agency in the context of Africa-China relations. I also have two other questions. You rightly showed that there are interlinkages between local patrons and illegal Chinese miners, the former enabling the latter. Yet you choose to categorize them in what I would call asymmetrical categories of comrades in need and comrades with power. I think that maybe these categories might not, or maybe you do it, but in this paper, maybe they don't sufficiently reflect the nuances of your paper. Because the category of comrades in need, in my opinion, as you write it, could maybe strip away the agency of the local patrons and make them appear as powerless, whereas you show that it's the other way around. And the category of comrades with power that is represented by the Chinese illegal miners seem to concentrate this agency and power in this category. Yet you show in your presentation and also the paper that it's much more nuanced. You also show rightly the different categories within this, the different classes within this category. That's management, business, and that this is an intertwined power relationship among these two categories that are mutually enabling one another. I also wondered, maybe could you bring up some concrete example of, like clear empirical example of how local patrons operate or have operated in the case of enabling illegal mining? Because you very clearly show the process, but I wondered if there were some very more empirical examples of how this has manifested itself concretely on the field. And a final question, and although this is not the main focus of this very interesting paper, I was wondering about the exercise of agency by local communities that are affected by illegal mining. How have they reacted? And what type of agency have they exercised, both towards these local patrons and also towards illegal Chinese miners? Do you have examples of that, and especially what has been the impact of this agency on this whole process? So thank you again for such an insightful paper and also presentation. I really learned a lot. I think there's much to do there. There's also much to do there in terms of policy outputs, as you mentioned. So congratulations again on this paper. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Folashadé. Thank you. Before Nathaniel, you posed a lot of questions to Nathaniel. I want to give him a chance to respond, but I also, before we do that, I'd like to address the whole audience that's participating in this, that this is a point where we would be collecting questions, and if you could direct those questions to Li Wenyu, who is managing the web site, that would be great. If you can't get through, then do let us know, and we'll find another way to get through. So Nathaniel, many questions and comments we'll put to you. Perhaps if you respond to a few of the ones that come up, and yeah, take it from there.
Thank you very much, Folashadé, because I really appreciate your comments and then your questions. Some of your comments, I would have to think over it for the next few months, and especially on the issue of comrades in need and comrades with power, because that's something I was really contemplating about when I was putting it into the paper, because it quite contradicts itself, because what I explain in the paper is not fully captured by those two terms. So actually, from the, I will just quickly share my screen again, PowerPoint. From my slide here, you realize the nuance that you were talking about, that the comrades with power also include some local Ghanaian patrons, as well as the comrades from China. But the comrades in need actually would refer to the poverty-driven class, who actually are simply seeking an economic livelihood due to economic hardship. So thank you very much for that. But with this issue of agency, what happened was Chris, Alden and I previously co-authored a paper on African agency and how local patrons have facilitated the absorption of private Chinese enterprises in the construction sector in Ghana. And most of the times, the literature on agency, which you yourself have done a lot of work on, from which I criticized you a little bit on that, was like the focus of agency role played by state is usually put on state actors in African countries. So usually you are looking at the government officials or maybe the president, members of parliament, or like key civil servants in society. But what we realized from my research together with Chris Alden and from research conducted by other scholars like Mohan and Lampert was when you go to the micro level of society, the ordinary citizens, for instance, within a particular geographical location also played a key role in determining the success of a private enterprise. Because from the literature on local patrons, I also realized it's very typical in China to develop what they call guanxi. So the Chinese like to emphasize the relationship aspect of a process, how to develop and build connections with the local citizens within the geographical jurisdiction of their enterprises, which is actually crucial to the success of the business, because these very people, as we defined local patrons, sometimes these ordinary citizens may be relatives of key personnel in the local authorities within a particular region. So if you build like good connections with the local citizens within a particular geographical location, which the Chinese like to do, it would actually eventually help you in securing or having quick access to solutions that you may need, because most African countries have a very bureaucratic system and require some bribes and corrupt activities here and there to get maybe some documentation or some checks that you may need for establishing your business. So thank you very much for that. But I refuse to provide empirical examples on this particular presentation for some reasons. But there are clear examples of how local patrons have reacted, taking a reaction to the influx of illegal Chinese miners within their mining communities. And this resulted in gun violence, for instance. And it's actually a bit depressing to discuss those issues. So in my presentation, I decided to put that aside. But the agency role played by local patrons has actually helped in minimizing illegal Chinese mining in some regions in Ghana. But what happens is sometimes there are state actors involved or backing some of these private Chinese enterprises. So the reaction from the local citizens does not produce any concrete results. So, for instance, in the Western region, there was a case of illegal mining there, which was run by the Chinese. And when the citizens tried to halt the operations, there were military personnel from the state that went there to stop them. And there are some illegal Chinese operations in Ghana, which is actually receiving protection from the military. These are documentaries that have been done by very influential media houses in Ghana, like Joy News, on the distraction for gold. It's a documentary that you can watch on YouTube. But you realize there is a collaborative effort between some state actors, some non-state actors, and some Chinese citizens. So this is where I like to make the distinction clear that it's not all the Chinese, it's just a few Chinese citizens, private citizens who are engaging in this activity. So thank you for your questions and your comments, which I would take into consideration. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks. Thank you. And we're getting in quite a number of questions. So what I thought I would do, as we have 15 minutes left, I'll the first of these put that to you, and which is, what steps can the government take to actively address illegal mining in Ghana? So if you could speak to that.
Yeah, I think there have been quite a number of informed research solutions by the International Institute for Sustainable Development. And they have suggested that, one, we need to regulate the sector. And this involves mapping the country's potential reserves and land use and providing access to the data, which is crucial to determining the appropriate locations for small-scale mining. And also, we need microfinance credit and savings, grants and government loans to help facilitate the process of small-scale mining. So most of the times, the private citizens, or like the ordinary Ghanaians who want to engage in small-scale mining, do not have the financial capacity to do so, or like do not have the credit to do so. And even if you have the credit, there are so many bureaucratic processes that you have to go through. So I think a grassroots approach and a reconceptualization of the whole sector, you know, and making it more conducive to the ordinary Ghanaian to engage in small-scale mining is actually very key. And a decriminalization of the sector is also very key to helping in improving like small-scale mining in Ghana. Yeah.
Great. A second question is, have there been attempts made by the Ghanaian government to hold Chinese actors accountable for the large-scale environmental damage that they have caused through illegal small-scale mining? What are the obstacles that Ghana faces in effectively holding Chinese actors, these actors, accountable?
That's a very good question, but the first thing I would say is that the measures that were taken in 2013, for instance, was to deport the Chinese or to arrest them, and most of them were eventually deported. But what I would say is that there are many things that we do not know, or there are some information that we do not have access to. So real accountability, or like maybe real punishment, you know, to the foreign nationals engaged in illegal mining, it's something that is highly questionable, because most of the processes involve deporting the illegal miners back to their country. But to hold them accountable is something that I would not like to comment about, because there is a lot of how do you call it? There's a lot at stake here, because China is a key donor and a development partner to Ghana. So when it comes to illegal Chinese mining, sometimes handling the issue can be a bit sketchy. I think we were discussing Aisha Huang's arrest and deportation. And this was a mastermind Chinese lady who was engaged in illegal mining. And Ghanaians were expecting that, you know, some form of severe punishment will be meted out to this lady, but she was simply sent back. Because sometimes, as I was saying, these are powerful syndicates. They have connections with governments and stuff like that. And maybe meting out a certain punishment may involve like the withdrawal of some maybe development projects and stuff like that. So there are a lot of obstacles here. But again, there are many things that we do not know, and we cannot have access to such information. And two, remember that Chinese citizens involved in illegal mining just form a small percentage of the entire population involved in small-scale mining.
Thanks. Could I sort of follow up a little bit on that, just to ask if other foreign nationalities are involved in this sector beyond the Chinese?
Yes. In my presentation, I mentioned there are some Russians involved, there are some Indians involved, there are neighboring countries, residents from neighboring countries like Nigeria, Cote d'Ivoire, and so on also involved. But the main reason why you would often see the prominence, the reason for the prominence of Chinese in the literature is because of the technology that they introduced. The technology that they introduced is actually what has ended up destroying most of Ghana's river bodies, because what they introduced was the chamfer machines, which was used for direct mining in the river bodies. Now, it's against Ghana's laws to even mine within 100 meters of a river body, let alone directly in the river. So you realize that though the Chinese may form just like 5% out of the 1 million people directly involved in small-scale mining, the technology that they introduce has actually put them on the radar whenever you talk about illegal small-scale mining.
Thank you. A third question is, and I'm going to bundle this one together with the fourth because they touch on similar issues. So this third question, I want to push more on the question of agency. Is it not worth exploring how Ghanaians are making a choice, that is to say, exercising agency as it relates to illegal mining? And then the next question has some similarity. I'd like a reflection when we politely speak of, quote, local patrons, unquote. Are we not speaking about an infection of corruption which fosters tolerance of that which is illegal under Ghanaian law? In short, isn't local Chinese mining being provided by government protection because movers and shakers in society have been bought off with bribes and other forms of illegal payments? So the first one is on pushing on agency and if they're exercising a choice as Ghanaians, and then secondly about whether we really are being tiptoeing around this as corruption, the agency as corruption, certainly in terms of providing licenses and that sort of thing.
I would take the second one as a comment, and I think whoever said that is very right. Yes, but the nuance I tried to bring out in my presentation was, yes, the business class and then the management class, the local patrons within these two classes are actually encouraging the activity and being corrupt themselves. Okay, but what usually happens, as I explained in my presentation, was the poverty-driven class is usually the people who are usually attacked whenever there is a military raid or whenever there is a focus of the media on illegal mining. And usually these are people who are simply seeking an economic livelihood. So there are a lot of things entangled in here. I'm not denying the fact that some Ghanaians are actually permitting the issue. Some Ghanaians are accomplices to the issue. But I'm saying there are lots of nuances here, and explaining or examining these nuances actually can help us in the strategies and the solutions we bring up to helping eradicate the issue of illegal Chinese mining. But I agree with the comments that have been passed in the question. Yeah.
And look to me at the latest question. Are there any implications for other parts of the global South from the example of China's mining in Ghana? Do you see this as a particular to Ghana and maybe its regulatory regime, or do we see something that resonates with other countries, either in Africa or other parts, Southeast Asia, Latin America, Pacific Islands, these Caribbean, that sort of thing?
Yes, thank you very much for that question. Very good. The issue of illegal mining is not particular to Ghana. In South Africa, we have a similar issue. When you go to South America, in the Amazon forest, we have the same issue. And it's interesting, I have looked at this issue across different countries in the global South, and you realize that the challenges that Ghana is facing, or the government of Ghana is facing in eradicating illegal mining by foreign nationals or even by the citizens of the country is actually not particular to Ghana and can be seen in many other countries. In South Africa, for instance, there is persistent illegal mining in the country, and several solutions, just like in Ghana, have still not yielded results. I recently watched a documentary on BBC of illegal gold mining in Brazil, in the Amazon. And it's just the same issue. But what happens is usually the foreign presence in most of these countries is less when you compare it to Ghana. That's the nuance that maybe can be put up there, because it appears that in Ghana, access to technical skills or like the technology for mining was actually brought by the Chinese. Whilst in countries like South Africa and in South America, for instance, the indigenous people there themselves have access to the technology. So usually there is little foreign presence in those countries, but it's not particular to Ghana alone.
Yes, I think that having done a bit of comparative research and read that sort of thing, I see similar patterns there. I think that it also brings to mind the idea of illegality. I was thinking one case, it wasn't about mining, but in Mozambique, timber, the cutting of timber. What was illegal about it was that some of it was taking place. The Chinese had permits, or they had Mozambicans who partners who had permits. But the fact that Mozambican partners were cutting in the national forests that were to have been left alone, that was the dimension that was in fact illegal. And I was thinking that similarly with the river, it's what they may have valid permits, but they're violating the terms of those permits. So there are elements of that as well.
Yes. Yes, yes, you are very right. So that's what I'm saying. The issue is very complex. It's very complex, and actually has given me a headache for the last 3 days in thinking about my presentation, because what happens is it wouldn't have been bad for foreigners to invest in small-scale mining, because most of the times the ordinary citizens who are running the operations do not have the financial capital. But when foreign nationals get involved, in this case, some Chinese, just a few of them, what happened is they introduce technology, and, you know, the work ethic of the Chinese is such that they want to extract almost all the gold from one point within a very short period of time. And that's led to the mechanization of small-scale mining. And according to the license, you can't use explosives, you can't use certain heavy machinery. But in order to increase or like improve like gold output, they introduce bulldozers, excavators, explosives, direct mining in the river within restricted areas. And this is the issue that has actually been on the radar for the last decade or so, because like it's literally illegal, and it's ending up destroying the environment in Ghana beyond repair, simply beyond repair.
My last question, and just to squeeze in, is I saw you quoted the Chinese ambassador, who was in a sense defending the miners, saying it doesn't happen in a more tightly regulated situation such as South Africa. So that's sort of shifting the blame, as it were, to Ghana. But surely the Chinese embassy and diplomats know that this can cause trouble to the image problems, publicity of that kind. Yes. Is that message also coming across, or is it one just of sort of blame shifting?
Actually, when I finished the paper, I shared it with a Ghanaian colleague who told me that I had been very lenient in my critiques of the Ghanaian citizens. So there is a general agreement that even from research that has been conducted on the field, that illegal mining is persistent as a result of Ghanaians collaborating with the Chinese in perpetuating the activity. So that is very clear. So if the Chinese ambassador made a comment that it's some local people in Ghana who are helping the Chinese to engage in illegal mining, that's something that most people would agree on. But then the other side of the issue is the Chinese also, with their technical know-how and their unorthodox methods, have actually made small-scale mining a very criminalized, criminalized and activity in Ghana. I was reading a paper on South African illegal mines, and you realize that it's done by the South Africans with no foreign involvement. Or if there is foreign involvement, these are people from the surrounding countries in the South African region, like Mozambique or like, Lesotho and stuff like that. But in Ghana, it appears that due to selfish interest on the part of some people in the management and business class, it's rather unfortunate that some Ghanaian citizens are actually the key drivers behind the issue of illegal mining in Ghana. Okay. I don't know if that it makes sense, but
no, it makes perfect sense. Thank you very much. I see the time. Unfortunately, we're just getting into the meat of many issues here, and we've run out of time. So I want to just end by thanking our speaker for a very interesting, compelling bit of research that has generated all sorts of questions and comments here. To thank Folashadé Soulé Kundu also for her commentary, her time and expertise in commenting on this paper. The audience for joining us today, Dr. Alvaro Mendez as Director of the Global South Unit, and of course Li Wen Yu, who helped put this together for today's event. Thank you, everyone, and we look forward to seeing you at the next Global South Unit or LSE Ideas event. Have a good afternoon. Thanks.